stamped out of sheet metal using the first plastic used in weapons.
The MP40 was incorrectly nicknamed the Schmeiser, after the famous German weaponologist Hugo Schmeiser, designer of the MP18 and Sturmgewehr assault rifle.
The weapon got its nickname as Schmeiser. The Allied troops would capture them, and on the magazine, because Schmeiser owned a manufacturing company, he stamped his name on the magazine. But in actuality, he had nothing to do with the design of the gun. When the Allies found the guns, they'd see Schmeiser on the magazine. Henceforth, they nicknamed it the Schmeiser.
The Schmeiser was actually designed by a German weaponologist called Heinrich Vollmer. The weapon was fed by a standard stick magazine holding 32 rounds and could fire 500 9mm bullets a minute.
Clear.
During the battle for Arnhem, the British airborne troops were armed with the Schmeiser's counterpart, a mass-produced stamped metal submachine gun called the Sten. But how did they compare?
Well, this target tells us that the Sten is not very accurate. With the Sten, you only count 3 armed shots, so you have a wounded soldier who's going to come back and fight another day. Clear. The MP40, I was aiming the gun the very same way. This target is actually a little further away from where we were standing, so a bit more accurate gun.
The Waffen-SS and their MP40 would rule the streets of Arnhem. It would be a crucial weapon that would blast the British paratroopers into submission and secure a vital German victory. Despite their triumph at Arnhem, the war was beginning to turn against Germany. The Nazis' industrial war machine was being pulverized by Allied bombing. Under relentless pressure to turn the tide of the war, Hitler's weaponologists would develop some of the best and worst weapons of the 20th century.
When it was evaluated in the United States after the Second World War, it was sort of like, what are these guys thinking about?
December 1944. The Waffen-SS would spearhead Hitler's last throw of the dice, the Battle of the Bulge. Personally selected by their Fuhrer, Hitler's henchmen would use weapons and tactics that were both brilliant and desperate. A new bolder, badder, and bigger brother of the Tiger tank would rumble through the blood and guts of the combat zone. The 70-ton King Tiger.
The King Tiger was a desperation weapon of all intents and purposes. It was probably the heaviest tank that has ever fielded for battle.
It mounted a longer 88mm gun than the Tiger I, thus giving it greater range, greater penetration against armored vehicles.
As well as a killer gun, Hitler's heavyweight was virtually indestructible. No Allied round would ever pierce its frontal armor. That's no surprise when you realize it's a shell-defying 7 inches thick. Just under 500 of these 70-ton monsters would be made. With that amount of heavy metal, something had to give.
The problem with the King Tiger is they up-armored it so much that if the Tiger I was mechanically unreliable, the Tiger II was twice as mechanically unreliable. For a vehicle of that size, with all the armor that it mounted, a very heavy turret, you need to have colossal engines to power them up, and it simply didn't have that.
In the thin Belgian roads that made up the killing fields of the Battle of the Bulge, the King Tiger's crown would fall, crash, and burn.
It wasn't suitable for use in that environment because the roads weren't wide enough. It lacked mobility, it lacked the speed to keep up the rate of advance that the Germans needed. So it was simply the wrong vehicle to use.
The Battle of the Bulge would end in catastrophic defeat for the Germans. It also marked the end of the road for the Waffen-SS's King Tiger.
When it was evaluated in the United States after the Second World War, it was sort of like, what are these guys thinking about?
It turned out to be an evolutionary blind alley in tank design because it lacked the key element, mobility, in the holy trinity of mobility, firepower and protection, which is what you want in a good tank. So the modern main battle tank, the American Abrams tank, the British Challenger, they're more derived from the lighter German tanks like the Panther.
With desperation fueling the German war machine, Nazi designers would develop some of the best and worst weapons of the 20th century. One new idea was a real curveball. Attached to the Sturmgewehr assault rifle, the Krumlauf, or curved barrel system, was originally designed to fire from within the safety of a tank turret.
The way this is used tactically was to open the hatch and stick this out the hatch of the vehicle and then literally hose the vehicle down from inside the vehicle. That way you stayed under armor and kept them off.
The Krumlauf's barrel bent at an angle of 30 degrees. It seemed to solve the age-old problem of how to blow your enemy to pieces while remaining safely under cover. But the metal barrel and the bullet itself were put under enormous pressure as the weapon was fired. German designers experimented with vent holes drilled into the barrel to allow the release of built-up gases as the bullet slowed to make the turn. This reduced recoil and stress on the weapon as it was fired. Despite these modifications, the Krumlauf would wear out after just 300 rounds. It was destined to become a weaponological dead end.
The question always comes up, does this work? And the answer is, yes, it does, but if you're in my crew, you're going to get it, and let me know where you're going to fire it, because I want to be under the Kevlar blanket in the back of the vehicle.
While some weapons designed for the Waffen-SS, like the Krumlauf, were technological blind alleys, others were hugely successful, futuristic ideas that were way ahead of their time. They would become the frontrunners in developing many of today's weapon systems. German optics experts led the way out of the darkness with a groundbreaking new night sight called the Vampire. It would be the very first infrared sighting system used by individual soldiers.
Vampire night sight was a piece of infrared equipment. It broadcast a signal of infrared energy. It's invisible to the naked eye. But through that night sight, you could see in the dark. This is one of the very first night sights that was actually used in combat.
Today, the Vampire's descendants rule the global combat zone and are an essential part of any soldier's armory.
Nowadays, we see more and more footage coming out of the Middle East. You see every soldier having night vision sights on. That lineage goes back to the German heritage in the Second World War with the Vampire system, being able to own the night. If you do not own the night, you do not own the battlefield.
Many of the weapons designed for use by the Waffen-SS form the template for the high-tech technologies that now boss today's battlefield. The Sturmgewehr, the MG-42, the Vampire Night Sight. Their technological legacy is set in steel. The Waffen-SS fought to the bitter end. They were the deadliest of enemies.
They did not want to give ground. They fought hard, they stayed, they held their lines. That produces the hardest fighters. Coupled with training and indoctrination, gives you the absolute elite.
As soldiers, they could very fairly be called elite troops. The problem with the SS, of course, is they're Nazis. They have this Nazi ideology, and remember, we won. We beat them, and deservedly so.
Drawn together, the branches on the Waffen-SS family tree reflect their unique genesis. From a gang of politically fanatical street thugs, they evolved into Hitler's deadliest fighting force, ruling the combat zone with the MG-42, the world's first assault rifle, the Sturmgewehr, and some of the heaviest metal ever to hit the battlefield, the awesome Tiger tank. They were the Waffen SS, the most feared fighting force of World War II.